Okay, so just covering sustainability, climate change, and progress to date, and some of the issues that flags up over the months I've been here, so we can sort of cover some of those points. Some of the key areas I think to focus on are kind of key. These are the kind of key areas in which we're working. So focusing on energy and climate change, dealing with the accessibility and transport and mobility issues, really important, and the city has been making tremendous progress in those areas. Protecting biodiversity and addressing environmental inequalities and its consequences on society. This is a really important aspect of sustainability that's often overlooked. There's a strong emphasis, if you look at the 17 UN development goals, around addressing inequalities and those issues. So there's a strong focus on that, and that impacts across the authority as a whole. So we have to look at our relationships with other service units as well in terms of addressing those issues. And developing a circular zero carbon economy. So that's about minimizing waste. It's about creating new employment opportunities around the green economy, the green industrial revolution. It's around all those kind of issues and opportunities for training and employment skills development. And then lastly, something that's really significant, as Councillor Boyle has already informed us, in order to have an impact on the city, it's going to require partnership working across a whole range of agencies. So if we look to just the City Council itself in terms of carbon impact, we account for about 1%, 1 to 2% of the impact in total. So therefore, we've got hospitals, police, all sorts of organisations, agencies that have buildings, use vehicle fleets, have resources, also companies and industries using industrial processes that use massive amounts of energy. So we do need to be working in partnership with them, and a lot of this focus is around partnership working. So starting with energy and climate change, the City Council as a body has got a CDP A rating, so it's a top level rating. We're actually A- at the moment, but when we've developed our plan, we'll be back up to A+. There's only 4 authorities in that category. We've also got a very innovative program that's called Regional Energy Systems Operator. And that's funded by Innovate UK and BAYES. It's a government funded project. It involves us working in partnership with West Midlands Combined Authority, Cadent, Western Power, universities, and a number of other partners and organisations that have interests and knowledge in the energy sector. I'll talk a little bit about that later as well. Again, looking at partnerships for securing investment for zero carbons. That's one of the things that relates to our work with RESO, looking to find ways of working with other organisations, and we are in discussions with other companies within the city around developing relationships with them to secure investment for putting in infrastructure. We're also having some impact, and in fact, I've got a meeting after this with Western Power, where we're looking at how they currently do business and how we can predict future energy needs and putting in infrastructure that's required. It's often done far too late in the process, so we're trying to see if there's ways of getting our thinking around what the authorities' needs are sooner in the process and thinking more strategically. We've also secured funding from Europe for feasibility studies on the use of solar. So we've got one which includes putting a solar canopy in the car parking area at the park, which is linked in with the park parking and also the ring and ride. Sorry, that's the word I was thinking of. Facilities and services. We're also looking at, and we've now secured £6 million for public sector decarbonisation, and that includes schools as well as our buildings. And that's making significant investments in solar, heat pumps, a whole range of different technologies to improve the efficiency within our own buildings. We're now involved in a national pilot called Climate View, which is a company that's based in Sweden. We're working with them on developing indicators to measure progress over time, and transition indicators, so something that tells us what behaves, so we can monitor and predict what impacts of behaviour change would be and how that will affect climate. And also, as mentioned earlier by Councillor Walsh, we're also looking at supplementary guidance in terms of issues that relate to energy. The RESO, just recently, we've just got past what's called a stage gate. That's kind of an assessment that the government do around whether projects proceed or not, or whether they have to put in restorative measures or take any interventions. In this case, we could pass with flying colours, so we've actually got a very good appraisal, and funding will continue for the programme. We've been looking at systems for zero carbon energy. The programme is looking at how can we maximise energy generation within the city boundaries, and also how do we link and create the right infrastructure for low carbon energy sources across the city. And this programme is one of the first. It's very unique in that it's looking at it in a strategic sense citywide. It's looking at the opportunities that different parts of the city present. It's also looking at the future governance. So we're moving, energy is moving from a large nationalised, large centralised energy generation plants to now something that is far more fragmented. There's energy generation on people's roofs, very localized, small community-based, to large solar farms or wind farms. So it's very mixed and diverse sources of energy, lots of different companies involved, including community. So it's looking at how does that manage in the future. The system of governance needs to change, and it's something that West Midlands Combined Authority and the City Council are interested in looking at, because it provides opportunities for more localized forms of energy management. And that includes also energy trading, sort of real-time trading, use of blockchain technology and all of the sort of 5G technology to maximize the benefits of how we manage that resource. So it's linked into smart cities, and we're of course looking at potential investors to invest in that infrastructure. So we've got some very interesting things that are coming out of that. We've actually got just showing a picture. You don't see the, sorry for the text, you can't, but it's just a diagram to illustrate where we're mapping energy flows across the city and where they're coming from or where they're going to. So whether it's gas, electric, or other sources, and that is very unusual. No, it's not been done in that detail anywhere else in the country, and it's providing some very interesting insights that the energy professionals are looking at the moment. So it's looking at energy flows in a kind of geospatial context. The program itself has got lots of elements in it that looking at from finance and investment through to, so WP4 is looking at actual project design and looking at what types of projects. So it's from solar, not much wind for us, but there's heat exchange systems, passive heat, a whole range of different technologies are being looked at, looking at everything that's available to the city and seeing which things are provide the best opportunity. And as you can see on the left, there's a lot of organisations involved in that, supporting that process. There's a lot of interest in this area. It's a very, the energy industry and others are interested in seeing what comes out of this and what we're learning. The other areas, of course, which also are energy users as well, and is incorporated in RESO, I must add, that we're also looking at the transport elements to this. So how we put in an EV infrastructure for the city. And as Councillor Boyle has said, we've got the largest number of charging points outside of London, and we are progressing very well on that front. But it's also issues around storage. What do we do with our own vehicle fleets? What do we do with the heavy vehicles in terms of whether there's hydrogen comes into the mix or whether we just use electric? So there's a whole range of different things that are being looked at. Very light rail is presenting a real opportunity, not just for the city for transport communication, but also as potentially a product to sell to market around the world, where Coventry could be a showcase for a really innovative approach to providing transport, a good alternative to the trans systems that other cities have been operating, one which has actually can potentially have greater reach because of the lower costs and because of the less need to remove infrastructure to alter the infrastructure significantly to put it in. So as you can see, a lot of things that are going on in relation to transport. And here's a view from Climate View, where we're looking at behavioural change and how that impacts on carbon in terms of addressing the carbon issues. So if we change behaviours from car to electric, we can work out what CO2 reduction there is. If we move from vehicles to public transport, and if we move from vehicles to cycling, these are kind of national measures that have made per unit on average, and we can work out that, well, this is what the likely savings would be. It will enable us to look at different options and what the potential impact would be on carbon emissions. So quite a useful tool. Now we're currently working with 4 other authorities on this project. There's ourselves, there's Newcastle, Nottingham, Dundee and Cambridge. And we've had a significant input, and we're particularly on the transport side, I think, is where we're making good progress on that. Biodiversity is a really important area for the city. There's a lot of it's quite an emotive issue within communities as well. And as mentioned before, we've got some very good projects on the go. And in the case of London Road Cemetery, that one's nearing completion. Had National Lottery funding. It's a heritage lottery, I believe, but it's been very successful in terms of promoting biodiversity and the importance of green space is really strong. And it's something that is interesting that's been kind of very strong focus in the City of Culture. There's been a lot of community engagement around green space and issues around green space. We made a case with the West Midlands Combined Authority within its 5-year plan in terms of focus on green space, and they've been looking at usage of areas of green space, mapping out across the whole region, which includes Coventry. So we've got some good detailed information there. And we've also argued a case for them to setting up a fund to support community driven initiatives that focus on management of green space. The first one on the list, the River Sherborne Corridor, is a partnership with the Wildlife Trust, who have a key role to play in the city in terms of promoting biodiversity. And we're working closely with them on a number of projects, along with the Canals and Rivers Trust. So there's some very interesting things in development, but it is an area that requires significant more work in the future. Addressing the inequalities, and that comes from a number of areas. So we've got the Air Quality Action Plan, where we know that those on low incomes tend to be living in the areas which have the poor air quality. It goes without saying, if you've got high traffic levels, the property values are lower. Therefore, the people with lower incomes are more likely to be living in those areas, and therefore they're more likely to be subjected to the poor air quality. So addressing Air Quality Action Plan is often about addressing those inequalities and trying to deal with those issues. We've also been involved working with the procurement team on social value policy. The economic development team have been also involved in that in terms of looking at what we do with developers and future development and trying to ensure that social value is included in development proposals and working with planners similarly on those issues and making them conditions on applications. Fuel poverty, we have a programme which is government funded for LADS. This is Local Authority Delivery Scheme. We've got over £2.3 million so far that's covering home retrofits. So improving particularly houses that are rated below C. So the ones which have a rating below C, to try and get them to C and above, and families that are earning below 30,000 a year. So it's targeting those in fuel poverty and also houses which actually have low energy efficiency. Similarly, we're doing some work supporting the food network, which involves parts of the council, but also a lot of third sector organisations. And very recently, we got status in terms of food places status with the Soil Association nationally, which is good, which would be helpful for when they apply for funding for projects and initiatives. And lastly, the opportunities for social enterprise. We mentioned circular economy, but there's plenty of opportunities to support development of social enterprise. And there's social enterprise unit at Coventry University and others. We're working with them at looking at where within the scheme of things are there opportunities for creating employment and training opportunities for people. So the circular zero carbon economy is a really significant area to work in. We've got some of the obvious things, for example, the Gigafactory and the Battery Innovation Centre, but also there's plenty of other opportunities in terms of looking at how can we change the way we do business and how can we support businesses in doing that. So as you know, we've got Business Sustain and the Green Business Unit that are under my management, but we support lots of businesses. There's over £1 million of grant have gone to businesses in terms of looking at saving on energy, reducing waste. And recently we've been in conversation with Birmingham University around a program which helps companies to identify other waste streams that could become someone else's natural resource. So it's got plenty of potential in terms of reducing waste and making waste a natural resource that could be of use to other businesses, and therefore reducing their operating costs. And then again, the opportunities for social enterprise in terms of repair, reuse, local sourcing, things like projects like Emmaus that do furniture recycling. There are potential opportunities for developing other initiatives, particularly around looking at energy efficiency and lagging for buildings. Is there an opportunity to develop social enterprise around providing some of those services, bringing down the cost to us, but also providing opportunities for employment for local people in Coventry? So there's the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. All those things that we just described deliver on one or more of those goals, and they will form the main plank of a strategy for the city. Will focus on those, and so we'll be creating a shared vision for a sustainable city, and that follows these 5 kind of pathways. So looking at low emission, looking at climate change. The second one is around the biodiversity. Third strand, as I mentioned, the circular economy. Then the one around resilient development, and that's about adapting to the fact that climate is changing. How do we address some of those issues? So things around looking at sustainable urban drainage, flood prevention, all those kind of things come into that. The types of trees that we plant, for example, might need to be different because of the difference in microclimate. And then lastly, looking at things like equitable people-centered development. So looking at things which actually dealing with fuel poverty, food poverty, and all the likes. So those 17 development goals will fit and relate to those 5 pathways. This is a kind of a recognized approach. It's been established by the International Council for Local Environment Initiatives, which is links in with the UN. So recognized, lots of authorities have used that pathway. It makes sense. So we're looking at establishing a cross-sectional commission of key stakeholders. There's also an anchor group within the city that also in itself has identified sustainability and zero carbon. So we know that there's people out there already interested in addressing this issue. If we work to these 5 themes, we can help to gel organisations around that. And then we can develop a strategy for sustainable Coventry with an action plan for each of those 5 pathways. So there's plenty of potential opportunities here, as we mentioned earlier, and I think Kaz has so clearly mentioned earlier at the beginning. There's plenty of opportunities. There's also ways of maybe doing business slightly differently. So looking at opportunities for how we secure funding. So opportunities from things like municipal bonds and crowdfunding and new funding streams, new ways of doing things. It's very much about looking out to ways of doing things differently, ways of managing energy differently. Some of that will require some national input. Some of it is local, but nevertheless, I think everybody, including national government, is up for looking at ways find solutions to these issues. And these are some of the kind of real opportunities that we have. So some of the things that from my perspective, which we're focusing on, is the transition of the corporate culture. So it's very much around colleagues in other parts of the authority all have a role to play, but some recognise that more than others at the moment, and it's about learning about the work they do and adapting that and finding ways in which they can do things differently to help address those issues. The City of Culture is a real opportunity for us to raise awareness and inspire change at community level. We're already seeing interest in particular areas around biodiversity, but also in other areas as well. We're getting approaches for things. For example, recently had an approach from a company that's a film production company that's aiming to be zero carbon. So they're looking at creating a zero carbon film set. And when you think actually when film production is a major industry in this country, has some significant environmental impacts. And if someone's trying to reduce that, they've actually approached Coventry in terms of being potentially a home for that and doing that work. That links in nicely with the City of Culture. So things like that, creating new opportunities. As I mentioned, a collaborative role in energy network planning and investment, trying to attract interest from investors, decarbonising our buildings, retrofit market, not just for us, but also looking at developers and landlords. And a key target group for us is difficult, but we will need to work with. And we have started meetings with the registered social landlords. The next step will be the private landlords, particularly those for houses in multiple occupation. At the moment, they're very slow to be moving in this area, and we've got to find and understand what the barriers are, what the constraints are, and how we can overcome those. And that's an area of activity that we've been sharing with colleagues in other authorities as well, to find ways in which we can move forward. So looking at local zero carbon development within our planning policies, as we said, we're coming up not too distant future, there will be a chance to review our planning policies and to look at how we can reduce impacts by setting various conditions and certain policies, and also supplementary guidance. So basically the local plan will make the high level statements, but then the supplementary planning guidance gives some of the detail of what we would like to see and what it would look like. So we are in discussions with David Butler and team in planning around issues around that, particularly looking at energy efficiency in residential commercial developments within the city. So in terms of buildings, but also there's opportunities for looking at sustainable urban drainage and those other areas as well. This is about achieving a green economic recovery and transformation. This provides real opportunities for doing that. And we put in the right infrastructure, we can make a difference. And it's also around getting that kind of social permission for radical change. It's about engaging people with the community and within businesses, about looking at doing things differently. I think the private sector actually recognises that largely. We're seeing significant moves in the right direction on that front. And then we have COP26. Coventry has put a bid to have a presence at COP26. This is, as you know, the next major climate summit, and it's hosted in Glasgow. The UK government, of course, has significant interest in that. Interestingly, the UK government has been supporting other countries around the world, and the British Embassy had contacted us for the Philippines, and we recently gave a presentation to all the local authorities in the Philippines, all the major cities in the Philippines, around electric vehicles in cities. So it's quite interesting that the government have identified us in terms of areas of excellence, and to support them in some of these things. So we have a submission that's in at the moment with 6 different proposals for projects and initiatives to raise awareness about what we're doing at COP26. That is a showcase to the world. It's a real opportunity for us. We hope to hear towards the end of May as to whether we've been successful. We've also done some things in partnership with West Midlands Combined Authority So if they're successful, there'll be elements of our things in there as well. So hopefully that that concludes the presentation today. So open for any questions.